because I'm so smart, but my brain is not working properly that I forgot to mention. And now I'm going to mention for you, for your viewing pleasure, that my reviews have some spoilers. And if you are not interested to have the books spoiled a little bit for you, I do try my best not to spoil them, but since I review some things in depth, then there might be a spoiler here and there. So keep that in mind. And also, trigger warning for all kinds of violence and other topics that I read in the books that I will present here. And on that note, thank you for stopping by, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Hello, hello. Oh, hold on a second. If you guys could see the setup that I have here for the recording, you would probably laugh. Well, hello, it's been a while. I'm back for this video. I had plans to make some other videos with certain, I think it was some tags that I was planning to do. It was a quarter year tag that Simon Savage did. But then quarter of a year passed and I didn't make it. So I guess I'll have to try again next year. Then there was another tag that I discovered through a different creator. I don't remember her handle, but I will write it down on the side so you can check her channel out. I still plan to do that one because it's not limited to a particular time period of the year. And I've never done it. I thought it was quite interesting, the questions that are in the tag. And I guess I'll do that maybe next week. I'm back in Ljubljana, as you can see, the usual setup. I didn't take a microphone with me when I was traveling for my fieldwork. Although I could have snuck a little time to record myself, I didn't want to torture you all to try and hear me speak with the horrible sound that the laptop has. So I chose not to film anything. I did read, and I read mostly to calm my anxiety because ethnographic field work is extremely anxiety inducing. Last year, I was not able to do anything during these periods when I had like free time in between, speaking to people, conducting my ethnographic work, although it never stops because once you are like self-isolating in the sense that you are taking notes, writing diary or transcribing, then you are also spending a lot of time reflecting and trying to collect your thoughts and also write down potential theoretical concepts that you could use for a particular data that you collected. And considering that ethnographic research requires a lot of patience, there's a lot of waiting that happens in between conversations that you have with people and just being out and about in the field. And it can be rather exhausting to sit. You have to be very patient. I never thought I would become this patient. But even if you are with people that you're supposed to talk to, you have to show a tremendous amount of patience. Sometimes they just refuse to speak, and you just sit in silence with them, and hoping that they will want to speak, even though they initially agreed. Or sometimes they agree and they just then change their mind and they are not picking up your phone calls or answering your text messages. So I think ethnographic research in itself is very humbling. the ego does not exist. If you want to do this line of work, you have to bury it. It's dead and gone, baby. But why am I talking about this now? Simply because I think it's important for you to understand the choice of the books that I picked uh, before going to the field, and then during the field and post field. It really requires tremendous, at least the ethnographic research, the approach that I'm doing, which is the dialogical ethnography, which Greber used. And it's not just that you are listening to people converse and that you are asking questions, but you are kind of taking part in the dialogical exchange. And that requires tremendous amount of concentration. Sometimes, in my case, I'm not able to take any notes or do any recording because people just don't feel comfortable. They want to take part, but they don't. It's also very difficult for them to kind of like see you take notes, and that can affect the information that you are able to access through these dialogical exchanges. They want to speak to you, but they just don't feel comfortable having any kind of material way that they are able to see for you to materially record the conversations. So most of them agree for me sometimes to take notes, but a lot of the times also I'm in situations where note taking is just not possible. And then I'm keeping the diary throughout the research, but I am also just taking mental notes. And sometimes you're able to scribble. Like in my case, I'm using my phone to write down maybe like direct quotations of some sentences that they say to me, and they don't mind that. But like if you're in the field, in the sense, when I say field, I don't mean just the field of research, I mean literal field, because I'm researching communities in rural areas. So oftentimes I am with them doing the work that they do, which means doing work with the cattle, like doing work in the field, like, I don't know, like gardening or anything like that, or just following them around while they're doing their work, the manual labor in agriculture, which is a very difficult work. I honestly, anyone who is doing agricultural work, farming, whether they are farming animals or just wheat or any kind of other vegetables, fruit, whatever they are growing, it's really difficult work and it never stops. I have to say, I don't think there is like a moment when they are actually taking breaks. Even when they have neighbors coming over, they are talking about the work that they are doing and asking for particular advice from the neighbors. So it can be very exhausting. So for this time when I was doing my field work, I thought, the best way to handle these moments when I am in between speaking to people, I will try to read something that is a bit not related to my field of study, just so I can decompress mentally, as mental exhaustion is a real deal, and it can affect also the way you process the information that is given to you, and the way you can um, listen, like the ability for you to listen attentively and to be able to take more detailed notes and write more detailed diary entries. And I can tell you that I have noticed in this last field trip that the mental and emotional exhaustion that has accumulated over the last year is really getting to me. And it's also affecting my ability to kind of memorize things that are taking place. And that's why it's important to take breaks, because if you don't take breaks, your exhaustion will definitely affect the information that you collect, how you collect it, and in the end, overall experience of the field. So I will start with the first two books that I read before I went to Serbia. And the first one is Erasure by Percival Everett. This is my first Everett novel. I read before that some books that were a little bit too emotionally draining, and I wanted something fun, and I thought this was going to be fun. In a sense, something to make me laugh, a little bit of dark humor. The premise is very interesting. It's about an academic in literature who decides to write a novel um, about a protagonist, a black male protagonist, from the perspective of white observer or white consumer of such kind of literature. That is how white people see black people in the US context. And the novel is divided in three parts, and the middle part is the actual novel that he writes. And it's written in this, I presume, supposed slang that white people in America think the black people speak in, or at least black people of a particular class. And it was very difficult for me to read it simply because of the spelling. And you have, like, he's very good in kind of conveying the voice of the character. It's in a first person narration, so I thought that was brilliantly done. And so the first and third part is actually kind of giving you an introduction into the life of the author. Thelonious is his name, and it's kind of like giving you context before he writes the novel and after he writes the novel, what happens. First, we learn how he decided to do this. It was sort of like a joke, but at the same time, it was very serious because he found himself in a rather uncomfortable situation. That is, his mother was diagnosed with dementia, and his sister gets killed. She was a primary caretaker, and finding himself in a little bit of a financial difficulty, he decides to write this novel because his other novels were rejected, his other manuscripts. So he writes it as sort of like a joke to just see what happens, and it snowballs into something I think he didn't even expect. And it's very interesting I'm laughing because I'm just now thinking of the scenes in the novel. I know that there is a film as well, and I would love to watch it. But before I actually picked it up, I thought this was going to be like easy breezy reading. And already, I think in first 50 pages, I was having mild anxiety attack because he's discussing also the precarity in academia. And it's a real thing. And it's very, very, as someone who wants to stay in the field and work in academia as a researcher and lecturer, it's one of the things that I am struggling with right now. I think this level of insecurity that exists despite the fact that you have invested so much into studying and just, doing this line of work, there's very little options for you out there, and very often the universities are looking for easier ways to manage the cost of educating the youth. And unfortunately, university is much part of the capitalist system. It's very, very uh, managerialized, and I have a huge issue with this. So when I was reading the novel, I thought it was going to give me some kind of a relief from my day-to-day anxieties regarding my future in academia. But unfortunately, that did not happen. So, in case you are a struggling academic or future academic, just keep in mind that this book is not going to ease your anxieties over those questions. And I love the style of writing. I loved the voice of Thelonious. I loved his character. I loved the complex family dynamics that are explored as well. And yeah, I really enjoyed it, despite the fact that it was giving me mild anxiety from time to time, every 20 pages or so. Also, this cover should be telling, you're looking at a boy who has a gun pointed at his head. I assume a toy gun, but still, this should be a cue. But obviously, I didn't pay attention. I just thought it's, a funny cover, interesting and funny cover. Next one is actually one tiny, tiny book that I picked up on a whim in a bookstore here in Ljubljana. It's called The Paper House by Carlos Maria Dominguez. I've seen it uh, in the bookstore, I think maybe on one or two occasions when I was there before. I picked it up, and I was really interested in reading books on books. And this book was exactly that. It's a very short novel. It's how many pages? 82. And it is a very interesting exploration of what kind of um, effect books can have on a reader's life, how books can have very serious consequences for your life and your death, essentially. They can be harbingers of beautiful moments and intellectual stimulation and emotional fulfillment, but at the same time, they can, in a way, be tools that unknowingly might lead you to your death. And this is what the book is actually exploring. It's starting with the death of a professor at a university. Here we are again with anxious topics in academia. But the narrator is her assistant, who's retelling the story of her death, which is very much related to the package that will arrive to her office. And she is trying to trace the sender of the package and why the book came with bits and pieces of cement. And it's really funny. I can just read maybe a small part for you here at the beginning, maybe a paragraph or two. It says, on the day in the spring of 1998, Bloom Lennon bought a second-hand copy of Emily Dickinson's poems in a bookshop in Soho. And as she reached the second poem on the first street corner, she was knocked down by a car. Books change people's destinies. Some have read The Tiger of Malaysia and become professors of literature in remote universities. Damien converted tens of thousands of young men to Eastern philosophy. Hemingway made sportsmen of them. Alexander Dumas complicated the lives of thousands of women, quite a few of whom were saved from suicide by cookery books. Bluma was their victim, but not the only one. An elderly professor of classical language, Leonard Wood, was left paralyzed after being struck on the head by a 5-volume of Encyclopedia Britannica that fell from a shelf in his library. My friend Richard broke a leg when he tried to reach William Faulkner's Absalom Absalom, which was so awkwardly placed he fell off his stepladder. Another of my friends in Buenos Aires caught TB in the basement of a public archive and even knew a dog from Chile that died of indigestion from swallowing the pages of the brothers Karamazov one afternoon when rage got the better of him. And it goes on. And I really think if this didn't hook you and convince you to pick it up, I don't think anything will. Next one is the first book that I read while I was in my field, and it's not a happy jolly book. I have to say I have trouble picking up happy jolly books, as you can see, even when I think I am picking intentionally a happy jolly book. I am not actually, and in fact this one is probably the least of happy jolly books. It's Patricia Melo's The Simple Art of Killing a Woman, translated from the Portuguese by Sophie Lewis. And I didn't say this one was translated by Nick Caistor. So this book is about a young lawyer who is in an abusive relationship, and in a moment when the abuse becomes violent, she receives an assignment from her boss to go to this part of Brazil, one small town on a border with Bolivia, I believe. If I'm not mistaken, assignment in the Amazonian border town of Cruzeiro do Sul. I think it's on the border with Bolivia. And she is supposed to gather reports from court cases that involve femicide. And she starts following these court cases. And as she's following these court cases, she's also talking about her relationship and how she ended up in an abusive relationship. But she also talks about her mom, who was killed by her father. And we learn through this family history. She has her own musings, I would say, more like therapeutic reflections about her family's history and the silence of her grandparents who raised her, mostly her grandmother, about what happened to her mom. She actually witnessed the murder, but she was only 4 years old and has erased this from her memory. And she obviously has trauma that was suppressed. And we are witnessing her kind of coming to terms with this family history. And yeah, it was a really well written book. I love the translation is also very well done. The topic is very difficult, a trigger warning for all forms of violence that you can think of, obviously. But it's not what I liked about this book. It's not that it's so heavily focused on the violence that she is documenting, but rather that it shows how through this very important and emotionally draining work that she does, how she builds relations with people she's trying to help. That is the families of the victims. Also, the book discusses class distinction and racial distinction in Brazil. And in particular, it focuses on the indigenous women and Black women. And she often has these reflections. If she were to report particular form of violence as a white Brazilian woman, how she would be treated differently in the system. And if in comparison to, for example, an indigenous woman. And I think this book is a must read for any young woman in particular, because right in the beginning she discusses this slow burn of a violent relationship. How does one end up in a violent relationship? And how even as a well-educated, well-off woman financially, she ended up in a violent relationship, and how difficult for women who are economically dependent on the partners who have a history of violence or domestic violence. It's very difficult for them to leave. It has a sort of happy ending for the character, but trigger warning, like I said, for everything that you can imagine and non-imagine. So if you're not in the state of mind to read about this topic, domestic violence and all kinds of forms of racism and abuse, then don't pick it up. I would not advise it. I did, however, find it the style of writing is gripping, so it will pull you in, and despite the difficulty of the subject that the book is tackling, then you will still keep reading, because in my case, I wanted to see what happens, or where will the novel take me. Next novel, I've known about this novel for a while now, I think since the English translation came out, and I had it on my mind, and I was thinking of ordering it online at one point, but then I chose not to. And then I saw a review by another booktuber. His name is Alex. He's a young literature student somewhere in the States. I will also link his handle. And I really value his reflections. His videos are very interesting, but sometimes he talks really fast, especially when he's presenting books. In one of his last videos, he did a presentation of books that he's planning to read this summer. There were some interesting titles, but boy, was he speed talking. I think if I had an option to slow him down, I would. Sorry, Alex. So this is the novel that I'm talking about is Djinns by Fatma Aydemir, and I have to say this is one of the best novels I read in recent years. It's one of the novels that kept me awake when I finished the first chapter. It's divided in, I think, how many chapters? One, two, three, four, five, 6 chapters. So we have 6 family members and 6 chapters. Each chapter is told from a perspective of one family member. And you have sort of these reflections going back and forth from the moment when the events are taking place in the present time, and present time for the characters, and past events. So you get to see the history of the family and the dynamic within the family from each member's perspective. And the first chapter, we already know the father dies, and the novel is basically about the events and reflections that transpire after his death. So the focus is on a migrant family from Turkey. They are Kurdish, and the father, Hussein, moved to Germany as what they called in German Gastarbeiter, which is a guest worker, I think maybe in the 70s or 80s, not sure. Can't remember exactly. It's very difficult for me to tell the time this is taking place. I think the final events are somewhere in the late 1990s or early 2000s taking place. Um, and so Hussein worked his whole life in Turkey and brought his family to Turkey. And his whole life has been about one goal, and that is retiring and buying an apartment in Istanbul and living out his retirement years in Istanbul. But a year before he actually retires, as he is renovating his apartment, newly purchased apartment in Istanbul from the savings that he collected over 40 years, he has a heart attack and dies. And we follow each character that is the family member um, on their journey to Turkey to attend the funeral. And we also see their reflection on their life as members of this family. One of the main themes in the novel is silence and how silence can shape family dynamics and how it can really affect your understanding of your own position in the world, your class and your ethnic identity. And because the novel is exploring migrant life in Germany, it's also exploring the particularities of the migrant life from a Kurdish perspective. So it has a lot of these universal aspects. And as someone who has lived a fair chunk of my life as a migrant, um, I have to say that I found some of the reflections very, um, well, I could relate to them. So in that sense, that is like the universal aspect that is present in the novel, but also you have this particular experience that the Kurdish migrants have in Germany, and also the particular experience of this Kurdish family, since the children don't even know that they are Kurdish. They believe that they are Turkish. And once the father dies, the silence around this aspect of their identity just falls apart, it melts away. And each member of the family is exploring how come is it that they spend their whole lives believing that they're Turkish. They don't know a word of Kurdish. They don't know anything about Kurds except from some information that is present in mainstream media. They don't understand themselves as Kurds. They don't understand that their parents are Kurdish. And it really is hard, like very painful subject that brushes on the dynamics that were created within the family. So we have children. So Hussein is the father, Emine is the mother, and the children are Umit, Sevda, Peri, and Hakan. And each child in their own way was affected by this code of silence, and this code of silence has kind of shaped their relationship with the parents. So we see how they are tackling this in a different way, and how they are carrying it within themselves, and the moment that they choose to break away from this silence. It's very authoritarian in a sense. The silence itself, it's imposed by a patriarch of the family, and it's followed to a letter by the mother, and anyone who's trying to break away from it is kind of punished in a way by exclusion, or self-exclusion, or imposed exclusion by the parents. And the conflicts are really, I think one of the most prominent conflicts is between the mother Emine and her eldest daughter Sevda. I found that story so painful. Uh, the moment Sevda decides to break away from this silence and confronts her mother, and that's in the last chapter of the novel, from the perspective of the mother, the the rapture is real, like metaphorically and materially. I don't think I've read this brilliantly written novel in a long time. The subject is also very relevant to the present times, and I think it explores the aspect of migrant life in Germany from a very important perspective. And I've spoken to some of my German friends about this novel who read it, and I had some interesting conversations about the ending and just in general the themes in the novel, and I really, really enjoyed those reflections. Yeah, pick it up if you can. The translation is beautiful. The translator is John Cho-Polizzi, and highly recommend it. I also heard that it's been turned into a theater play. So if you are German speaking, you can, I think, watch the play. I'm not sure where it's available, but maybe they are doing a tour. A friend of mine told me that I think she saw it in Berlin, or she knows that it was played in Berlin in some theater. So if you're watching from Germanistan, pick it up. Next one is a memoir that I actually finished today, and it's a very short book again. I'm trying to read more books about um, I would say about academia, but not present time academia, or more like academic reflections or intellectual reflections. And this one is Reminiscence of a Student's Life, a memoir by Jane Allen Harrison. It was published in 1925, so it has a very specific writing style to the period. It was published by Virginia Woolf's Press. I think it's one of their first, or maybe the first publication of their press. And it's a really short reflection that gives you an insight into the Victorian England. You get to learn a little bit about the what kind of privileges women of bourgeois class in England had, um, and how limited their access to certain social and educational circles were, or and if it was that limited for them, how it was for the working class who worked in factories. It was not good. One of the things that I kept thinking about while I was reading it was about a book that I read, believe maybe 6 years ago now. It's called The Five, and it's about the five women that Jack the Ripper killed. And these were all working class women who were murdered. And it's a biography of the lives of these women, but she digs deep into the archives and gives a lot of social context for the lives of these women, and a lot of hypotheses that she gives why certain things might have happened the way they did based on the historical and social conditions of the time. And that's what I was thinking about when I was reading this, because Jane Ellen Harrison had a rather privileged life. She was well educated, she attended Cambridge, she worked in an archaeological institute, I think, something like that. She traveled. She was in literary circles in London. She had a really good life, I would say. I do appreciate one of her last reflections. It's, I think, the last page. She says, "Old age, believe me, is a good and pleasant thing. It is true you are gently shouldered off the stage, but then you are given such a comfortable front stall as spectator, and if you have really played your part, you are more than content to sit down and watch. All life has become a thing less strenuous, softer, and warmer. You are allowed all sorts of comfortable little physical licenses. You may doze through dull lectures. You may go to bed early when you are bored. The young all pay you a sort of tender deference to which you know you have no real claim. Everyone is solicitous to help you. It seems the whole world offers you a kind, protecting arm. Life does not cease when you are old, it only suffers a rich change. You go on loving, only your love, instead of a burning, fiery furnace, is the mellow glow of an autumn sun. You even go on falling in love, and for the same foolish reasons, the tone of a voice, the glint of a strangely set eye. Only you fall so gently, and in old age you may even show a man that you like to be with him without his wanting to marry you or thinking you want to marry him." And I think that's her privilege, to be able to grow old at that time and in such a way, because we know that many people did not have that privilege when she lived. And it really puts things into perspective. I mean, as a 40-year-old woman slowly marching towards the second half of my life, I think it's a privilege to grow old. And if you have a privilege to reflect on your life in this way, then I believe you had a happy life. And I think she did just that. She had a very happy life. I mean, she challenged the norms of her time, and she reflects on them in the previous chapters. But I just thought this reflection on old age was beautiful, and I wanted to share it with you. That's it from me for now, and I hope you have a good Saturday, and I hope you enjoyed watching this video, and I will see you in the next one. Ciao!